Barakatah Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushai, Bahashem, Racha Kodash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is There is Neither Jew nor Greek. This is taken directly from Galatians 3 and 28. And this is a scripture that these anti-Christians try to use to say that the Lord loves everybody, and just want to thank you anti-Christians, for pretty much, doing what you do, because it makes us dig more and more and find more and more info in the spirit. Now I was going to do a separate lesson, but I ran across something that came to mind last night, and pretty much I was looking up some information this morning, and I ran across some goodies, so I want to go into it. But matter of fact, you know what? Let me just pull up that scripture. This is Galatians chapter 3 and verse 28. It says, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Yahushua Mashiach." Now we know that there are more nations on the planet than just Jews and Greeks. We know that there are many, many nations, and that right there shows you that, the Lord wasn't speaking to all nations on the planet. It was just dealing with the Israelites, that were being called that were being called Greeks, the ones that were being called Jews and the ones that were being called Greeks. Okay. Now there was something that happened to them. And what happened to them, there was something known as the Hellenization of the Jews, or the Hellenization. When the Greeks took over, beginning with Alexander the Greek, and they started conquering the different nations, they started to assimilate these nations into the Greek culture, custom, worship, diet, and language. And some were more fierce than others. Some were more intense than others, but nevertheless, when the Greeks came into power as an empire, they impressed their religion, so to speak, and their culture upon the world. Now, I ran across this, which I put in the description box. Let me know if this actually comes up in the description box. If not, I'll try to copy it and put it in the live comment section. I did put it in the description box, for those, that are interested in reading more. I read about 9 pages, and then I was going to go to the 10th. I started a little bit, but it's a lot of reading because it's a lot of history. So I just kind of just jotted down some of the main points, and I'm just going to kind of briefly go through it, and then just give you some history, which even this individual that put this together, it's called Christianity and Hellenism, Ivan Dobschutz. And even he said that the information that's out there for the Hellenization of the Jews is very fragmented, meaning that there's not a whole lot of it, but there are traces of Hellenization, or the Hellenization of the Jews. Okay. Now, when we read this, it says the Hellenization of the Jews between 334 BC, which is when Alexander the Greek conquered, and 70 AD, which is when Jerusalem fell as a nation and were run out of that region of land unto this day. So I guess it's written by George Holly Gilbert, PhD, DD, Doctor of Divinity. I thought it was written by this individual, but maybe he's the one that put this online. I'm not sure. Oh, they got other stuff. Okay. Book and chapter. Okay. I didn't realize that this is what we're dealing with here. They got other ones. Okay. Oh. All right. Nevertheless, we're going to read a couple of paragraphs here, and then, go into it, and then just give you a little better understanding as to why in the New Testament it speaks about salvation going to the Gentiles, to the Greeks, so on and so forth. Which, vocab with his very deceptive ass tries to use the term Hellenistes or Hellenistas, which is one form of the Jews or Israelites that spoke the Greek language, that were a part or that were converted to following Yahushua, all right, or proselytized, all right. That's one form of it. But these Hellenistes were Greek-speaking Jews, which knew that they were Israelites, knew that they accepted that they were Israelites. They were keeping the feasts and the customs and the circumcision and all of that. The only thing was that they spoke the Greek language because of the regions that they were born in that were speaking predominantly Greek. Okay? Just like the Apostle Paul had Roman citizenship, but he was an Israelite. It's very simple when you apply the basic principle logic of the scriptures and if this Holy Spirit is guiding you. So it says the period of Jewish history extending from Alexander the Great to Yahushua, that says Jesus there, is one for which our sources of information are fragmentary, meaning there's not that many, especially as regards the contact of Jews and Greek. This fact is all the more regrettable because the impact of Greek civilization on the Jews, which then took place, gave to the period an importance that almost ranks it with the period of the great prophets or with that of Moses in the beginning of the Hebrew state, right? Because, vocab said intertestamental period, which is between the two periods, and Elder Pastor had a hard time saying it, and I had a hard time saying it at first, So I just, like I was listening to Elder Pastor's video, and I was just cursing vocab out, on the video, and I was trying to say intertestamental, but I said, you know what? Between the two testaments, all right? So he's very deceptive in the way that he operates, vocab, all right? It says an attempt will be made to present in this article the sifted testimony of the ancient sources regarding the Hellenization of the Jews prior to the composition of the New Testament. Did you hear that? It says the period of, regarding the Hellenization of the Jews prior to the composition or the putting together or compiling or writing of the New Testament. And it's very important to understand that history of the Hellenization of the Israelites prior to the writing of the New Testament. And if you understand that history, then you understand why it says there's no difference between a Jew and a Greek, why it speaks about salvation being open to the Gentiles now when it was never open to them, ever, the actual Gentiles, because it's not speaking about the Gentiles at all. It's speaking about the Israelites that became Hellenized or became into a Gentile state of mind by dabbling into the affairs, customs, worship, language, diet of the other nations, which the Lord forbade. In Leviticus, the 20th chapter, he said, don't do after the manner of these nations, because for that reason is why they're getting kicked out. So basically, if you do the same thing, you're going to get kicked out of this land too, and I'm going to abandon your ass like I'm doing them. Okay? Now, let's jump down. That was page 520. Now we're going to jump down to page 522. Right? And we're going to go to page 522 in the first paragraph. We're going to start, where is it? Right here. It says Clearchus, right? And you can read through here to find out about him. Josephus, who appears to have taken this interesting fiction directly from the book of Clearchus as the Aristotle discourse particularly. So they're saying that this is, that this didn't happen. That Aristotle didn't discourse with the Israelite, but the knowledge was there. So regardless of if he did or not, the point here is Clericus evidently knew nothing definite of the Jews, right? For he supposed the word Judean to be the designation of a class or family of philosophers who were descended from those of India, right? And this is important because you had Israelites that came from that region, Babylon, Assyria, you know, the Medes that were down in that land also. You had all of that region there. You know, you had Jake among Elam, and that's why they would come from those different lands, and that's what the Jews in Jerusalem, devout men out of every nation, that's what it was speaking about. When you go there to the book of Acts, the 2nd chapter, which is a cold cut to these anti-Christians, Acts 2 and 5, and they were dwelling at Jerusalem, Jews, devout men out of every nation under heaven. Why? Because they were scattered among all these nations. And this is something that they refuse to address. And shalom to the bishop, to the Akim elders. If there's any apostles listening, shalom to you, to the sisters. Now, when we jump down here to the 9th verse, Parthians and Medes, see? So the land of the Medes, you had Israelites up there, and Elamites, which is India, in that region, and dwellers in Mesopotamia, which is the ancient name of that land up there, you know, where you have Babylon, Iraq, and all of that, right? And in Judea and Cappadocia and Pontus and Asia. So all throughout those regions, you had Israelites scattered that were coming to Jerusalem to keep the Passover, to keep the Feast of First Fruits, to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. All right. And by the way, let's see, the 24th of this month, which I keep forgetting to put it up, but the brothers already put it up. The brother Cornerworth from the New York camp and the brother Amawan Gabar put up the post of Hanukkah coming up November 24th at evening, right, through December 2nd at evening. Okay, so mark that down, jot that down. November 24th at evening begins Hanukkah, and it ends December 2nd at evening. All right, and that would be this Sunday evening until that whole week to the next week, to the Monday, to that following Monday in December 2nd. All right. So just pass the word on, pass the video around. Y'all know what to do. And y'all should stay on top of that, you know, GMS new moons and high holy days. All right. So it goes on to give you different parts, the places where they came from. It speaks about proselytes. You think, you know, Pastor Lynn tried to slide this in there, which is talking about Israelites that came out of those Gentile mind state, you know, but it's also dealing with the Jews in Jerusalem that were following the traditions of men, that were following what they call the Sanhedrin, which is the council of the Pharisees, Sadducees, lawyers, doctors, so on and so forth. And they turned from that to following Yahushua. Then you had Cretes and Arabians. So you had Israelites scattered throughout all these lands. All right. So this is what he's speaking about here. All right, to be the designation of the class of family of philosophers who were descended from those of India, which were Israelites that were scattered in that region. Am I in the right? Let me see. Let me make sure. I said it is possible indeed that a Jew of the 4th century before Christianity may have become a Greek, not only in language but also in spirit. It's not credible, however, that there was a Jew. Right, so it is credible. This what he's saying. It is possible indeed that a Jew, Israelite of the 4th century, which is the 300s before BC, before Yahushua, may have become a Greek, not only in language but also in spirit. Why? Because you had those Israelites that became Hellenized, right? That kept the customs of the Greeks, spoke the Greeks, didn't call themselves Israelites, but then you had those that just spoke the Greek language because the area where they were born was the predominant language of that area was Greeks. That's why you had Alexandrian Jews, you had Cyrenian Jews, you had Israelites that were coming from Asia Minor and those different regions coming to Jerusalem to keep the feast that only spoke the Greek language. All right. And that's why Pontius Pilate wrote on the epitaph, I think it's called, or that the sign on top of the cross of Yahushua, John 19:19. And Pilate wrote the title and put it on the cross, and the writing was Yahushua of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. This title then read many of the what? The Jews, the Israelites. For the place where Yahushua was crucified was nigh to the city, and it was written in Hebrew and Greek and Latin. And those are the predominant languages of the time. You know? Now, let's go from there. Let's go back. So it says, it is possible indeed that a Jew of the 4th century before Yahushua may become a Greek, not only in language, but also in spirit. And you can read the rest of this. You know, they're saying that the encounter that this individual had with the Jew is not, you know, possible, or whatever the case may be, or that there's nothing to substantiate it. But the point is that it was possible for the Israelites to become Greeks because of the Hellenization that was going on back then. Now, let's jump to the next page. Matter of fact, let me see. There is then in the ancient writings nothing to indicate that prior to the time of Alexander, the Jew had begun to be influenced by the Greek. Right. That was prior to that time. Prior to the time of Alexander, there was no records that the Israelites were being influenced by the Greek culture. Why? Because the Greek culture was not a big thing back then, because that really started to spread when they conquered the Persians and became an empire. That's when they started to impose their will on the world. Let's go down to the 23rd, page 523. And let's go to the first paragraph. Let's see. And where is it? We should. Okay, so it says, it is therefore from Alexander and his decade of beneficent conquest, 334 to 324 BC, which it was really like 12 years, that we date the beginning of the Hellenization of the Jews, which was one day to bring Greek elements into the sacred writings of Christianity. We got to read that again. It says, it is therefore from Alexander and his decade of beneficent conquest, 334 to 324 BC, that we date the beginning of that Hellenization of the Jews, Israelites, which was one day, because in the future, to bring Greek elements into the sacred writings of Christianity. So this is why you have, scriptures like this, Galatians 3:28. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Yahushua, Jew nor Greek. These were Israelites that were caught up into the Greek customs. That's why there's a difference made between the Greek, Hellen or Hellene, and the Grecian, Hellenistes or Hellenistas, which the Hellenistas, which were the Grecians, are Jews who made Greek their language. The Hellene or Hellen that were brought into the fold were those that made the customs, language, diet, religion of the Greeks their own, which they did not call themselves Jews anymore. And like I always make the point is, if you couldn't call yourself a Jew, right, and you were conquered by the Greeks, what did you have to call yourself? A Greek. That's why the Apostle Paul, during the time of the Romans, had to call himself, he was an actual Roman citizen because he was born in that region. He wouldn't be born in the region of Rome or a province of Rome and call himself an Indian or from another region that another nation had conquered. No, he would call himself like today, you're born in America, you're called an American. All right? You learn the English language, but we're still Israelites. It says, in this process of assimilation, meaning being bonded together with the Greek culture, of Greek culture and philosophy by the Jews, there were two external facts of primary importance. First, there was the invasion of Palestine by Greek settlers. You had the Ptolemies and you had the Seleucids. All right. It says, and second, the dispersion of the Jews throughout the Greek world. That's why the Apostle Peter said to the strangers, or the Israelite strangers scattered throughout, Pontus and Galatia and Cappadocia, and Ephesus and Galatia and Asia Minor, so on and so forth. Man, somebody get this individual out of there, man. You got these, either bots or these hustlers, these hucksters, man. The Lord ain't dealing with you hucksters, man. It says, first, there was the invasion of Palestine by Greek settlers, and second, the dispersion of the Jews throughout the Greek world. These movements we shall now consider. And you can read more, all right? Right, the coming of Greeks into Palestine in any considerable number was subsequent to Alexander's conquest of the land. All right, now let's jump down to the 524, page 524, right? And we're going to go to the last paragraph, right? It says one, and then it's going to end. Okay. It says, when we descend to the next century, to the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, 175 to 164 BC, which the Old Testament in the book of Daniel, the 8th chapter, speaks about. The book of Daniel, the 8th chapter, Daniel, the 11th chapter, speak about Antiochus Epiphanes, but it doesn't mention names. When we go to the Apocrypha, it mentions names. When you go into the history, it mentions the name. It mentions how he conquered Israel and how he imposed his will and stopped the sacrifices and did all this stuff. So all this information is out there. But all of a sudden, these brainiac anti-Christians who have gone to college and studied, they know how to study and look stuff up. Somehow they miss that whole history of the Hellenization of the Jews. You know why? Not that they missed it. They don't want to touch it because that destroys that lie that the Lord Yahushua died for all nations. He only died for the nation of Israel. It says, we find more numerous evidences of the presence of Greek elements in Palestine. Okay? That's what we find. So when we descend to the next century, to the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, 175 to 164 BC, we find more numerous evidences of the presence of a Greek element in Palestine. And that's why the Jews, the Israelites that knew that they were Israelites, had a disdain for these Israelites that had turned their back on the law, statutes, and commandments and embraced the religion, ways, customs, and language of the Greeks. Now let's jump to page 528, which is the last page that I got something on in this book. And like I said, you could read through it. I'm sure those of you studious brothers, when you go through it, you're going to find a lot more. And you're going to be, if the Spirit hits you to do lessons on it, you'll find more information. So now, on the first paragraph, right, we're going to go until, just bear with me 1 second. All right, so it says, thus far, we have spoken of the presence of the Greek in the land of the Jews as an agent in their Hellenization. What does it mean to be Hellenized? It means to be forced to follow not only the language of that nation, but their customs, their religions, their diets, their language, even so far as to not being able to call yourself by your proper nationality. For those of you that don't know, this is Second Maccabees, the 6th chapter. This is this is the what they call the intertestamental period, which when you do research, you find out that the original King James Version and other versions of the Bible back then had the Apocrypha in it, including the Spanish Apocrypha, a Spanish Bible. All right, the Casiodoro de Valera. Right, you have you have the taking out of the Apocrypha in around 1826 by the so-called, I haven't gone through this history in so long. The Biblical Destruction Group, all right, the Biblical Destruction Group took this out in 1826. If you find other sources, they'll tell you other different things, but that's the research that I found. And then in 1869, around there or so, Dr. Lorenzo Lucena managed to take the Apocrypha out of the Casiodoro de Valera. That's where you had a revision where they removed the Apocrypha from. Now, the original King James had the Apocrypha in it, but then even the King James Bible today, you'll find some that will not have the Apocrypha in it because they removed it. All right. Now, this is 2 Maccabees chapter 6 and verse 5. Right? It says, the altar also was filled with profane things. This is what the Greeks did. They profaned, they were the first abomination that made desolate. But that scripture in Matthew 24 and others, especially Matthew 24, when it speaks about the abomination of desolation, that's talking about specifically the Romans. The altar also was filled with profane things, which the law forbiddeth, which swine. You had the statue of Jupiter Olympus there. It says, neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or ancient feasts, supposed to be feasts. So you couldn't keep Sabbaths, you couldn't keep ancient feasts, you couldn't circumcise your sons, you couldn't have anything to do with anything that resembled Jew, Israelite, or to profess himself at all to be a Jew. So if you could not profess yourself to be a Jew, if you couldn't call yourself a Jew, what did you have to call yourself? You would have to call yourself a Greek. This is where Timothy's father comes in, Greek, because they try to say that he was, the Edomite, he was a white man, he was a Greek. First of all, the Apostle Paul lauded Lois, which was the grandmother of Timothy, and Eunice, which was the mother of Timothy, for being very pious, very devoted to the laws of the Lord. So here it is, you got this woman, Eunice, who is very devoted to the Lord, to the law, statutes, and commandments of Israel, but she's going to marry a heathen? Come on, man. So you couldn't call yourself an Israelite, all right? So in page 528 of this book, the American, not the American, Hellenistic Judaism, which really, it's actually the Hellenization of the Jews between 334 BC and 70 AD. So this is actually a different book than those on the side. Those are just books that I guess are related to this. So first paragraph, we start off at there and then we end there, right? Yep. It says, thus far we have spoken of the presence of the Greek in the land of the Jews as an agent in their Hellenization. Now we're going to jump down to the second paragraph. Okay, yet more important for the Hellenization of the Jews before the New Testament. Do you hear that? Yet more important for this Hellenization of the Jews before the New Testament. So if you understand this history, right, and you understand what took place, prior to the New Testament being written, then you'll understand that the reason why it says, like in Galatians 3, there's no difference. There's neither Jew nor Greek. And others, there's no difference between the Jew and the Greek. Why? Because they were both Israelites. It's just that one of them was speaking Hebrew, the other one was speaking Greek. Then you had others that were so immersed into the Greek culture and religion that they didn't even call themselves Israelite at all. They just forsook that. Like you had Tiberius Julius Alexander, which was a general that helped to destroy the temple in 70 AD. You know, and then you had this devil, Agrippa II, who during 70 AD helped the Romans against Israel, because he was the Edomite anyway. He was just basically just helping his own. And I've been watching these different documentaries, right, on they have a whole bunch of different ones. It's the People's something, the People's, what is it called? The People's, just bear with me 1 second. I was telling the Elder D-Mash about it. Let me see if I can pull it up. The People's, damn. I can't think of it right now. Let me see if I go. Just bear with me 1 second. The People's Profiles. That's what it's called. The People's Profiles. Those are 3 separate words. So the People's Profiles is a channel that goes into, you have the Roman Caesars. Then you have like different Caesars, Marcus Aurelius. They speak about Charlemagne. They speak about Al Capone, Lucky Luciano. They give you a lot of different documentaries on different individuals out there. You know, I kind of lost my train of thought of why I went there, but nevertheless, let's get back to it. It says, yet more important for the Hellenization. Oh, and in there, when I looked up, who was it? I think it might have been Vespasian or one of them. I forget who. Forgot which one it was, which one of the Caesars. And pretty much they said that Herod Agrippa II, he pretty much helped the Romans. And also what he did was he had sellouts, Sambos among Israel that were part of the military that he sent to help, the Romans against Israel. So it says, yet more important for the Hellenization of the Jews before the New Testament era than the presence of Greeks in the land of the Jews, which we have spoken, was scattering of the Jews through the various lands, which from the time of Alexander had come more and more under the sway of Greek civilization. I'm going to read that again. Yet more important for the Hellenization of the Jews before the New Testament era than the presence of Greeks in the land of the Jews, which were Israelite foreigners, of which we have spoken, was the scattering of the Jews through the various lands, which from the time of Alexander had come more and more under the sway of Greek civilization. That's why there's no difference between a Jew and a Greek. There's a big difference between an actual Jew and an actual Greek. Depending on which Greek you're talking about, whether you're talking about the Edomite Greeks or you're talking about the original brown-skinned Japhetic Greeks, Ionians. It says, to this subject, we must give careful attention if we are to understand the extent and depths of the impress of Greek civilization upon the Jewish people, upon the Israelites. So you have to understand that history in order to understand why the scriptures say what they say. There's no difference between a Jew and a Greek. Why? Because you could not call yourself, you had those whose forefathers, like Timothy's father, who sold out to the Greeks, and down the line, he kept what he was taught as a child. So he was born after the flesh that way because his parents, all the way back to either during the time of Alexander or during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes or one of those rulers among the Greeks, conquered and made the rule or the custom of the Greeks priority for all nations. And you could find that history in the Apocrypha, and you could just go and you could do research on the Hellenization of the nation of Israel. When you go to First Maccabees, the first chapter and the 41st verse, moreover, King Antiochus, which is Antiochus Epiphanes, wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and everyone should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. So you had nations that agreed to this. Because why? Because they had the power. The Greeks had the power at this time. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion and sacrificed unto idols and profaned the Sabbath. So pretty much what happened, Timothy's father was caught up in this because his forefathers going all the way back to this time were the ones that forsook, being an Israelite and became Greeks to get a better, a fairer shake, so to speak. Here it says in the 11th verse, in those days went there out of Israel wicked men who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant or an agreement with the heathen that are round about us, which are the Greeks. For since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. So they wanted what? They wanted benefits. They wanted, to be able to live good. They wanted to be able to eat good. They didn't want to be persecuted. They got tired of being persecuted. So they forsook their own nationality and the laws of the Lord to follow the ways of the Greeks. So now you're talking about roughly 200 years into the future from that point. And you had a whole bunch of Israelites that were just straight up bugged out into that Greek philosophy, not even knowing that they were Israelites. That's why they had to be brought back into remembrance. All right. And just a little side note, just as a side note, the Apostle Paul mentioned Colossians 3:11, where there is neither Jew nor Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, which is considered to be, savage, Scythian, bond nor free, but Yahushua is all and in all. And these barbarians and Scythians were Israelites, because they considered, certain Jakes barbarians. Why? Because they didn't speak the language. They were uncouth. They were not cultured in the Israelite ways. They didn't have the mannerisms of an Israelite. And then the Scythians, right, found out today that in the land of Israel, you had a city called Scythopolis, which was the city of the Scythians, which was a place that was conquered by them, right? And it was named after them. It says Scythopolis is an ancient city in Israel on the site of modern Beit Shean. And you could go back into the Old Testament and find this city. This is they conquered. It was originally known as Scythia, which was the name the Greeks gave to the land on the northern coast of the Black Sea, roughly corresponding to today's Ukraine. So you had Scythians that were up in that region, right, that were said to have conquered this region of land here called Beth Shean, and they renamed it, or it was renamed or called Scythopolis. Okay, so the Apostle Paul was speaking about these Scythians, which were actual Israelites, right? And you see here, this is Tyre. This is the Mediterranean Sea. This is the coastline. You had Tyre. You had Sidon that was on the same region. You have Tiberias, Caesarea Philippi, Damascus up here, right? Hippos. Then when you scroll down, you have right here Scythopolis, Beisan, which is the same as the ancient Hebrew nation. All right. So he may have been speaking about these individuals, but definitely know that he was speaking about up there in Scythia, which is, they say, is modern day Ukraine. In that area, you had a lot of Israelites out there that were outside of, the contact of Israel, and they were pretty much considered to be the worst of the barbarians, because they were Israelites. All right. Then you had Neapolis, you had different, names. Then you had something called Decapolis, which is a 10 cities. Decapolis, 10 city was 10 cities where Israel dwelt in. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was on the other side of the Jordan, on this side over here. There were 10 major cities that made up what they called Decapolis. All right. And there's so much history. It says its Greek name Scythopolis is very likely derived from a colony of Scythians who invaded Palestine in the 7th century BC. You got Herodotus, and left some of their number behind in that region. That's why the Apostle Paul mentioned them. All right, and that's pretty much it. So I just figured I'll just share that with you, a little something. Now, one more thing is, when you look through, is it this one here? No, it's not this. It's actually, see here, you got Scuthus, which is Scythians. Now, in the Old Testament, right, in the book of Judges, let me see if I could find it. Right there. Now, it doesn't appear in the Hebrew, but I just, just a little factoid I want to just share with you. To show you that they know. Judges 127, where you see the word Beth-shean, right? Beth-shean right here. In the Greek, which we just saw that what the word Scythian meant in the Greek. In the Greek, down here in the writing in the Septuagint, you have here Skutos Palis, Scythopolis, because that land, Beth-shean, was renamed Scythopolis after the Scythians, city of the Scythians. Okay, just a little factoid. All right, so with that, I pray that you brothers and few sisters have been edified. Till the next time I say Shalom, the Lord's will. I got another lesson that I wanted to do, but I figured let me just jump on this, a little historical, lesson that is important to know based off of the Greek history of the Hellenization of the Israelites. Shalom.